We are almost done, but we still have some time for making some, I think, interesting questions to the speakers. And before making those questions, let me thank you for coming here and sharing with us your data and thoughts about these interesting things. Okay? Well, before making this, I have two questions for each speaker, just two questions, and one final question for all of you. Okay? Okay. So I had a brief presentation before making my questions, but I will skip that. Okay. That's my first question for Maria Angeles is this one. Have you seen in some way in your data some Flynn effect on people playing video games?
Okay. Do you want me to directly answer after each question?
Yeah.
Okay. I have had, and in fact I have some data about a spectacular improvement in reaction times, but I can't call it a Flynn effect till now. We need to collect more data as to be sure, okay? But in fact, experience with video games since childhood is having as a result that the speed to solve the games is being much faster.
Mm-hmm. That's why I was making this question, because you said in your presentation that the younger people is going faster for completing exactly the same game. So this suggested.
However, I have a competing hypothesis I have to discuss previously. I have the feeling or the hypothesis that new generations do not go in deep into the game. They go just looking for the points, the cut way to find the solution, instead of enjoying, as did the previous generations, into the story. This is why I was concluded that what we need is engaging a story, but having the key points to solve the puzzles. Otherwise, new generations don't read the story just a little bit and go through to solve the puzzles only.
Maybe this is a good explanation for the standard Flynn effect.
Could be.
We must think about that. My second question for you is this one. If playing, you convince us that if playing video games requires intelligence, because you have a lot of data proving that. And my question is, if playing requires intelligence, do you think is it possible to enhance G just playing a lot?
I don't know, but I have no data at all. And in fact, the data I have, there is an increase in the performance, but it's just in the mean interval. So it's not a genuine increase, you know? When people say there is a statistical, a significant difference, they sometimes forget that you have to look at the interval and the confidence interval of the mean. And in fact, my post-raw scores, post-training, are just in these intervals. So I would say by now that no.
So your answer is no?
No.
Okay.
By now. I don't know, tomorrow or next week, but no now.
But what are your expectations about this possibility? Do you have a positive feeling about increasing G, playing a lot?
I'm not sure.
Because you said that playing video games is not killing time; it's another thing. So
yes. It depends on the type of video games and how challenging they are, and so it's similar to brain training platforms. And so what they are showing is that the way to increase your higher level capacity is not easy. What they are really obtaining is an increase in very small processes. And the more important one are visual discrimination and hearing discrimination. And those two processes are the key points for reducing the slope of cognitive aging. And so perhaps we will have to work on those small or cognitive processes underlying G, not go directly to G. I don't think that playing a lot is increasing your level. Perhaps you are being higher. I mean, your response time is going higher, or perhaps you are widening your attentional focus, as the lab by Vabelier is obtaining.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also a negative outcome with this widening focus, because the likelihood to be distracted is higher, because you have more information. So no, you widen your focus, but you have more information. So those studies are so recent that we need more data and to go in deep. Okay.
So your answer is still no. Okay.
Yes, we don't know.
Okay, thank you.
If you, so I was thinking, just after your talk, I was thinking.
So difficult your accent for me, sorry.
I'm sorry, apologies. I was thinking after your talk that one of the most popular games is, well, let me ask the other way around. The games that you had in your talk all had a kind of defined score or a puzzle to solve or an ending point. One of the most popular games is The Sims. You know The Sims, which doesn't really have. It's just, you just control little people, and do you know this game? Is this a thing? And they just wander around the house, and they, go to work and come back and stuff. And there's never really an end to the game, and there's never really a point where you have like solved it or won or beaten the game or anything like that. So would you recommend that people play games that have a defined finishing point, or is any game going to stimulate people mentally, or?
I think it depends on the personality. Okay, the kind of games as The Sims are very good to train how to plan and how to organize your behavior, the behavior of others, and the relationships. So you can just put a goal, and once it is covered, you finish the task, or you play just to increase the complexity of the interactions between people. And this is very interesting to manage so huge complexity. My point yesterday was that we are failing to mix adaptive games as adaptive tests, because the adaptive games we have are not GF or the best GF games. And so we need to mix. Portal 2 is a very good GF, but it's not adaptive. So people has to go to all the levels, and this is very frustrating because many can't. So they just give out the game. So this is the point. And so for each intelligence level will be an end, a different end. And so everybody will get satisfaction, and we psychologists will get the assessment level. So he's able to solve 2 rules problems, 3 rules problems, only with 4 elements, with 5 elements. Okay? This is my point.
Let's move to the Douglas presentation. My first question for you, Douglas, is there are no differences on average IQ between some countries. I am thinking in Finland and Spain, for example. Okay, no difference in IQ, but there is a large difference in the PISA exams.
I really have no explanation for it. PISA scores, people have dissected those PISA scores in a lot of different ways and suggested that, it depends on not just the whole country, but sections of the country, the distribution of IQ. For instance, in the United States, if you take out ethnic groups, the United States does much better on PISA scores than it would if those ethnic groups were included. Mm-hmm.
But Richard Lin,
I would have to look at the data.
Yeah, but I am going a step further in this question, because Richard Lin and some others compute the correlation between the IQ of different countries and PISA levels.
Yeah, there's a
and the
fairly
correlation is
substantial
quite
correlation.
high. Yeah, it's quite high. So I don't get how to fit all this information into your framework, because you said yesterday that IQ is the main factor.
Well, I would like to see the plot, the linear plot of PISA scores and IQ scores, and see how big a deviation it is and whether it's within the range of
And the people
reasonableness.
people behind PISA says that for explaining these differences among countries, the schools and teachers are important. So that's why I am asking. I am asking.
Well,
that.
I'll give them 10% of variation there. Yeah, up to 10%.
Okay, I get it. Now, my second question is not a question, is that if you agree with that. We can save a lot of money firing thousands of teachers.
Yeah, but what would you do with those kids at home all day?
Well, we can use, and that's the second part of my second question, is that we can use computerized teaching. And that's it?
That's been suggested before, and I think if it's well done, it might well work. I mean, there are now, for people who are educated at home, and in the United States, a lot of kids stay home and their parents educate them. There are formal programs that are available, computerized testing, and a lot of kids stay home now, particularly in very religious families, up till high school and then go to high school.
But will you
So
support?
I think that would be possible.
But will you support a politician saying that we can fire teachers and replace them with computerized methods?
I would, but teachers' unions wouldn't. So I would, yeah, as an experiment, that would be fine.
So we are losing our jobs?
Yeah.
Ask him.
We are losing our jobs?
Well, you would, I mean, given your union, you could still be doing research here, and you would cut out a lot of time of just, I mean, is it really a wise use of a PhD's time to teach the same thing over and over again? When if it could be automated, it might be even more effective. Skinner proposed this a long time ago, and I've actually seen it used in courses, and it works fairly effectively. So
Okay.
there are a lot of things that could be done that would get rid of the human part of it.
Okay.
And I would have no problem with those kinds of things if they were shown to be as effective as teachers. I mean, in the course of the years that I taught, I often wondered what I was doing there. I mean, am I just a motivator of students? Am I just an entertainer? What exactly am I doing? I'm mapping out a course for them. I'm testing them, making them learn a motivational source, but I was never quite clear what it. I mean, maybe somebody up here has a better idea of what they were doing as a teacher. That couldn't be done automatically, or, you know, with. I often told my students that you'd probably be better off to go over to the library and read three psychology books than come to lectures, and just show up and take the tests. No one ever did that.
The first question, Stuart, is that you present very interesting findings about some kind of general cognitive decline, but I haven't heard anything about the classic distinction between what happens with fluid and crystallized intelligence across development, because we know there are different trends there. And this is one of the strongest arguments by Bas Hunt, for instance, for keeping them separate.
Yeah, they don't seem to come out very easily in just cross-sectional studies, but they do appear in sort of an aging context. Yeah, in our research, actually, we do find that, because of course, bear in mind that in our stuff we're zooming in on the 8th decade, so from 70 to 76, or eventually 79. And so what we don't see is this big long-term you know, this increase in the crystallized abilities and then flattening out. We actually see a slight decrease in some of the crystallized abilities, and I think that's what you might expect, given that people are you know, they're functionally declining, their brains are declining, and so on. So it's not so much that these are immune to aging; it's that they do decline a little bit. Even if you look at some of the studies of the NART, the National Adult Reading Test, which is a test where all you have to do is just pronounce irregular words. in English. So some of the words are campanile is one of the words, Italian. And so you just have to pronounce one of the words that you presumably you've seen before, and that does show some decline. If you look at some of the studies of, I think the study of the nuns in America, the aging study of the NART declines there, and it's supposed to be one that stays totally flat, and it's in fact supposed to be one that is preserved even in the face of dementia. And I think it is to a greater extent than all the other tests, but it still shows some decline as well. So what I'm saying is the depressing conclusion that applies to all the other tests even applies to some of the tests that you might feel more optimistic about.
Okay. So the answer to this question is that you think it is not worthwhile to keep the distinction between fluid and crystallized.
I think the distinction is not a completely like bright line distinction. I think it's useful having it, but you shouldn't conclude that the crystallized abilities are totally unchanged in age, because they will start to decline as we get very, very old.
Okay. And my second question is that you said that it is difficult to predict change. That was a pretty exciting part of your presentation yesterday. Yeah. And do you think this can be attributed to the fact that there is a lot of random effects there, and if this is the case, we cannot manage that?
There are several reasons why we find lots of associations with the level, but very few associations with the change. And this happens, by the way, not just for the brain stuff that I showed yesterday, but for the cognitive decline as well. If you try and predict cognitive decline, there are way fewer predictors of that change than there are of the initial level that you start at. So yeah, it could be the case that we just need a longer period so that there's more decline, and so you're getting a larger effect size of decline to then detect with your predictors, whatever you have. So that's the kind of optimistic one. And the pessimistic conclusion is that there really is, you're absolutely right, there's just too much variability and too many random sort of stochastic aspects happening in aging that are not predictable by the kind of standard things which we use to predict things like people's grip strength or their whether they've got cardiovascular disease or not. But there is some progress being made in predicting cognitive decline, and we need longer studies, and we need the right analysis methods. And so I'm still not convinced. I'm not at the moment convinced that we're going to never find these things. We need a good amount more.
I get the impression that you are not very interested in the phenotypes. I am right in that feeling? Because you said many things about genes and phenotypes, but there is something in between. And
phenotype concept has been a very interesting concept, I think. So I've also been involved in investigating the endophenotypes, like the alpha peak frequency, for example, but also brain volume and other measures that we can derive from EEG. And one of the theoretical justifications for doing that was obviously because we thought, well, we have the DNA and we have the phenotype, IQ, and that's very complex and it's very far away from the DNA, so we must go for something in between. It's closer to the DNA, so we think it's much more heritable, and also the effects on that endophenotype will be much easier to detect. But that didn't turn out to be the case. So, for example, the endophenotypes that I investigated, like brain volume, were as much heritable as IQ, but they were also as polygenic as IQ. So there was no gain in, if the goal is to find more genes for IQ, there's no gain in going via that route, and if you compare that to the direct route. And also, one of the things that was also a major factor for me not to do a lot of research in that area anymore was because we didn't really find a lot of very good endophenotypes. Brain volume, of course, is related to IQ, but its correlation is about 0.25. Alpha peak frequency, in my study, we didn't find a correlation. Other studies did find a correlation. So there's no evidence for, or there's no consensus on the very good endophenotype for IQ. So I think the endophenotypes are interesting by themselves. I mean, brain volume and alpha peak frequency, they're heritable phenotypes, and it would be interesting to find genes that are involved in those phenotypes. But using them as an endophenotype, at present, with the current state of our knowledge, we don't really need to do that, I think.
So according to what you are saying now, I guess that your evaluation about such a huge projects such as Enigma are not very positive.
The big Enigma project?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting project, and it relates brain volume now also in collaboration with the PGC, the Psychiatric Consortium, and to see whether we can find common denominators. But there they don't say anything about which of the two is the endophenotype. It could also be the other way around, of course. We're simply looking for shared genetic factors. And then you can increase your power, because then you have a genetic correlation. So any gene that influences both of those will be easier to find if you include both of the phenotypes in your design.
Yeah, but in order to understand the path you were explaining yesterday, for going step by step and trying to understand the mechanism behind the relation between genes and behavior, you need to take into account what is in between.
Yeah, so for one thing that we of course are doing is we would like to have a good cellular phenotype. And of course that's also an endophenotype. It's somewhere in between IQ and the genes. And there it's also still difficult to determine what is the readout, what is the test that we should do, the cellular assay that tells us if this is a cell that was derived from an intelligent person or from a little bit less intelligent person. We still don't know. Yeah.
And my second question is a bit poetic, because listening to what you were saying yesterday, I was imagining the butterfly effect, because you were talking about very small effects of genes. And what do you think about the possibility of thinking in this butterfly effect, in the sense that very minor differences from the outset make a huge difference at the end of the day? So we are looking for something that we cannot find there.
Yeah, well, that can very well be the case, of course. If there's a gene that changes the working of a protein, for example, during development, which is a very slight difference, but it's apparently a crucial protein for later scoring on an IQ test, then that will be a very small effect with huge consequences. If we model this in vitro using iPS cells, you can model the whole development. So if that's the underlying mechanism, then you might be able to track that down, but only if you know exactly what to look for, of course. Other changes, for example, in interaction with the environment, I think that will be extremely difficult to, I don't know if we will ever be able to detect such effects. Yeah.
Okay. Anything in the panel for Danielle? No? Okay. Moving ahead. Now questions for Emiliano, because most of your presentation was based in functional data. Okay. Why are you excluding from your framework the structural evidence?
So the answer is it's simple, in the sense that there's less evidence about the structural data, and it's really complicated to have reliable estimates of structural connectivity. We know that the structural connectivity, so the density of the fibers and everything, really predicts functional connectivity for centered networks. So that would give the complete picture. But if you want to start from one of the two, I prefer to start from functional, because we have also strong functional correlates that you can then replicate when people are doing a task, and you can record the same type of signal. While structural, it's a static measure, it's there, and then it's difficult to translate to the sound.
Are you saying that you are using functional data because it's easier to get some findings?
Exactly.
Okay.
If you want to start from something, you start from this, and then you get your head around it, and then you start to add additional layer of complexity. The functional data, we can handle it. The structural one, I don't know. I had a nice discussion today with one of your students, and I think we can try to do something, but Yeah.
And how do you interpret the latest meta-analysis published in Intelligence in 2015, where they failed to find any overlap between the structural and functional findings in relation with differences in intelligence? That there wasn't any overlap between the structural findings and the functional findings. How do you cope with that?
But in the correlation with intelligence? Not between the two measures. Okay.
Between both. You get the map for the structural findings and the map for the functional findings, and there is no any overlap between both maps. How do you cope with that?
In relation to how they correlate with intelligence?
Yeah.
So the correlates are not the same.
Among themselves.
Among themselves. That's weird.
That was a key finding of this meta-analysis.
I mean, there are a lot of other studies showing some overlap, so I'm not familiar with that study in particular. That would be weird.
It's not a study, it's a study of
meta-analysis.
studies. So,
Yeah.
so that was pretty scary to fail
No,
to
it
find.
is. It is.
Yeah.
But again, just to be clear, so there's no overlap between the two, or not overlap in the correlates between functional connectivity and intelligence, and structural connectivity and intelligence?
The areas they find are correlating with the differences in intelligence using structural data.
It's not the same that, okay.
Okay, so that was a key finding of this meta-analysis.
No, that makes more sense. I mean, you can have different correlates. They are not supposed to be the same, because the functional one is not a static measure, so it can change through time. And maybe that's explained why it's less reliable, and you can find less reliable results, more variable results across individuals, and maybe they don't overlap.
So you are suggesting that a structure and function can go their
In
own
terms
way?
of correlates, probably yes. But, and there is also a big issue about the methodological approach. So maybe all this, I don't know how they correct for this kind of difference in sequences, especially for DTI and DVI, so the structural analysis. They can really affect the structural information that you get.
I can send you the paper.
That would be great.
And my second question is about the finding you highlight in your presentation, because you found greater similarity at rest than doing something. How can we explain that?
So this is not about a specific connection.
No.
Because I see also structure there.
Yeah, because that's a second question related with that. Forget about, do not read that, just listen to me.
Okay. So, I don't have an answer for that. I think that was the weakest part of that paper. They also found some, actually I skipped that part, there was also a nice correlation with fluid intelligence. They show, and I think from that point, when they show the difference between rest and activity and the fluid intelligence, that was the weaker part of the paper. They didn't have an answer to. So, it's difficult to explain this kind of finding. But I think at rest you have at least less variability, because the network are those. And so, no, sorry, it's the opposite. So those are the regions, but a tiny variation in the connectivity at rest can make a difference, while during the task, especially if you want to correlate it with behavior, for example, the neural efficiency theory suggested then the activation reduce. And
the people into the scanner for doing something, or we can skip that?
No, the graph was suggesting that if you do just a comparison between rest and task, rest seems to be a better predictor, but then the best accuracy, you get it with the combination of the two. So the combination is still, you should always get both rest and.
Yeah, and don't you think that if we can learn a lot more looking at the resting state brain, do you think this suggests that a structure is more important than function?
Yeah, could be, because if you assume that this resting state connectivity pattern has some kind of evolutionary benefit, so we reinforce this pattern, the structural information is actually even more relevant at this level. Then the functional one, the functional activation pattern, can also derive from the way you activate your brain during your life. And maybe you have different patterns because you have been through different experiences, but the core, who should talk with who, it's been more genetically determined than the activation pattern. So structural, then rest, and then functional activation. I think that's the order.
My first question for you, Adam, is that do you think, or do you have some information, perhaps Emiliano can help in that putting more gamma within one theta wave may increase the noise in the system? Do you think this is a possibility? Because you are packing more information into the same.
You have to remember that there are really scanty data. It's probably 5, 6, maybe 10 reports.
But you know all of them, so perhaps you can provide some answer to this possibility.
I think it's a rather theoretical possibility than an empirical fact. But those negative correlations between the strength of coupling that Norbert observed and we observed may suggest that yes, that processing complex information is more vulnerable, more volatile, more prone to interference, and in this sense it is more noisy because it's less stable, I think.
Mm-hmm. So the answer is?
It might be, because it's only a hypothesis, but it's...
Your answer is? What's your best guess about the possible answer to this question? Yes?
Yes, I think on the theoretical level it may be the answer to intelligence. What is intelligence in general? Its ability to process complex information in so severe and unpleasant conditions for the brain that only some brains can do that and others fail, while they are quite good at processing less complex information because it doesn't require so much, it doesn't yield so noise and so instability. Only the most intelligent brains are able to process unstable, noisy, quickly collapsing information.
So, using your response to this question, we can predict a lack of success if we try to improve intelligence, changing this kind of signals in the brain. Is that correct?
Really, it is guessing. I wouldn't.
We are talking about the future. I remember that because I'm making these questions because we are talking about what is going on in the near future.
Could you repeat what you were?
So you predict a lack of success when we try to improve intelligence, changing this kind of signals in the brain. Because you said that only some brains can cope with this complexity, this kind of combination of...
No, on the opposite, that the fact that some brains supposedly are able to process such volatile information and others not, may be a suggestion that we could help those poorer brains also to work in such uncomfortable conditions.
So this is just a functional limitation, not a structural one. So.
Rather, yes.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Well, my second question for you is related with my latest question, and is if it's possible that changes in the CFC index you were talking about in your presentation can produce some kind of collateral damages, because we are talking about complex systems. So maybe this kind of intervention can modify the entire system. Do you think it's possible?
What do you mean by collateral damages?
Well, if you make, I will explain that. I remember now the butterfly effect I was talking before with Daniel, because if you are changing something there that you think is important for improving something, maybe you are also changing some other thing in other side of the brain that is not so positive for you. What do you think about this possibility?
I will answer in a more general way that having a good theoretical model that is defined in precise terms of information theoretical language gives you a possibility to generate as many predictions as you can, test such test the model for such a question as yours, see the simulations, and the model helps you to design a proper experiment that can test such a prediction, and then you go to the lab and test such predictions. So this is the proper way, not that you ask me and I'm answering right away. I have to go to my lab, run a simulation, think what kind of experiment can test this simulation, then go to another lab to test it, and then I can come back here in 6 months and answer your question.
Okay, so I see you are not brave enough for provide. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And now the last two questions for the last presentation for Norbert. And the first one is about because you said many things in your presentation about the potential role of the sex variable in this kind of research. And you said something about how sex interacts with differences in connectivity, but we know now that these sex differences in connectivity are no longer relevant when you control for brain volume. What do you think about this kind of discussion?
Sex differences are, I think, present in the behavioral level, or in the test level, if you like have, and they are also present in the structure.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, I'm not an expert in connectivity analysis, because I don't have enough nodes. Mm-hmm. This is my problem. So we will try to do that in a different mathematical model where you need just the minimum number is 18. I have 19 these nodes, and so we maybe can then see if there is a sex difference in this. But what they found, this large study, they found a difference in 2015 in connectivity.
Another group that
yeah, but you see, this is okay. You in science, you will have a lot of findings during the period, and then they will find something, and the others will do.
Yeah, but because many times we go in this way trying to find some difference between males and females, and you can explain that difference using other type of
I don't have
evidence.
All the data in my head, so
yeah.
I in my opinion, I would say I was doing now, maybe before this invitation, I was asked by Lynn to do an article on sex differences in IQ, and actually, if you look at the studies, from different, there is a lot of I would say policy and a lot of this time where everything should be equal. Mm-hmm. And this equalization, it's more. There are a lot of political things which are in there, also in research. When they're doing, for instance, they're doing sex differences, and then they mention just parts of it. So they won't mention the Russian studies. They won't mention the Nieborg recent research on differences on behavioral level. So what I think is that we have some differences all over, and if they don't display in behavior, then it would be actually a paradox. So this is my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. My second question is that I didn't get a clear idea of your view about the difference between the spikes and slots perspective for explaining differences in working memory.
It is the slots, and it is the continuous resource difference. I didn't mention spikes.
But the same thing.
Oh, you think that the spikes are the same thing as the continuous? Okay, just.
I use just one word for that.
Okay. If it's so, the difference is actually that, for instance, if you have slots, and let's say you have 3 slots, mm-hmm. and you feel, for instance, in these tasks where I showed this small figure, you feel 3 slots. Then the others are away. Mm-hmm. You don't see, you don't know them, you cannot recall them, you cannot do anything about them. In the resource, if it spikes, which I think, I don't know this name, but okay, then you have a total resource, let's say, some energy, and this energy is then divided, and the more elements you have, the more it's thinly, and at the end, would be just gray matter if for this one. But okay, the problem is that it is very difficult to distinguish now when you do it on the behavioral level. It's very difficult to distinguish whether you are doing guessing because you don't know, or whether you're doing guessing because it's blurred. So there are some differences when it goes to the level of recognition or recall. So in the recall model, it's much better the other one, these spikes. In the recognition, when you have to recognize, which is a little lower memory load, then this theory is better. And when you go then at the end on the neural level, then you have more support for the sloth model. This is this is from literature. I haven't done experiments in this direction, never.
In study 1, the result was the correlation with the individual alpha frequency for males and females.
This is the general one, you think the big one?
Yeah, the general one. And so you mentioned a correlation of 0.43 with rotation verbal factor for males. Okay, and 0 for females.
Not 0.
Okay.
No.
Almost 0.
Minus something for verbal, because it's, you see, this is a stupid calculation of this.
No.
Yes,
the
you
point
have
is
negative.
Yep.
If you have negative, then you have actually the negative correlation would mean that faster brains in females are better in verbal performance.
Yep.
A positive would mean that faster brains are better in rotation performance. So therefore, is this confusion? This is the calculation is not so very, let's say, nice to understand. And then you have double zeros and minuses and everything.
No,
and
but
then
my point comes with comparing with a study 2. In a study 2, with working memory and individual alpha frequencies, results were almost not significant for both sexes, but you had a sentence about females with higher posterior and lower anterior with the alpha.
Yeah. This was a general finding, not related to any. That was females do. We did a lot of studies in power.
Yeah,
and they're in power. Yes, okay. This was related there. But also similarly is here. They always show this discrepancy. I think that they involve more frontal areas in resting and then in activity also.
Oh, thank you.
I think so. But okay, it's EEG. You never know in EEG whether you have frontal, if this really is frontal. Yeah. We did some Loretta's years ago when we had the software, but no, we don't have it anymore. There was more frontal for females.
Okay.
But we could change this.
I'm not asking about.
It's good. It's good to change it.
Just
I mean,
a clarification about the results.
We did training, and we used origami. You know the paper folding stuff.
Very good.
And we changed actually the female EEG became almost equal with the male EEG of high performance. So we were very happy about it. I mean, this is one of in my opinion, one of my best studies, but it's not so very popular, but okay. So in my opinion, it's really good.
Okay, so let's move to the final question, and if possible, I'm really interested in getting one answer from you. Okay, and this is not the final question. Forget about that. So the final question is that. What would you propose if Bill offers you $1 billion?
To make a video game.
Think about research, I would take the money and go.
Don't ask me questions. Just answer the question.
I take the money and go. I won't propose anything. Give me the money.
Go. I will go to the Caribbean. Okay, I see your point. Okay, let's begin with Maria Angeles because it's this
for me,
far away.
The answer is clear. To make a video game, to recruit a big team of professionals with many different skills and abilities, as to be able to elaborate a video game that will be assessed from childhood to elderly, and all the cognitive processes underlying the G factor, with distraction, without distractions, and allowing professionals to have an assessment while players are enjoying the game.
So you think that investing this amount of money in doing something with video games will improve our knowledge about what intelligence is?
No, perhaps we are not improving knowledge, but we need other things. And the things we need in science are participants. And participants are refusing to come to our labs because they don't like our test. They don't like to spend a lot of time. But if you tell them, okay, I have a video game, they come. And I think new tools should be able to recruit participants and also to understand some response processes that are elusive to our test or paper and pencil test now.
Okay, thank you. And
Yep.
I have no doubt what I do. $1 billion is $1,000 million. So I would begin an institute somewhere in a nice place, and I would find the best people working in the areas I talked about: cognition, neuroscience, and genetics, and I would bring those people together, and I would randomly distribute them through offices, so they had to be next to each other, even though they may not like each other. I'd give them, to begin with, $1 million each, and say, do research, try to make it as collaborative as possible, try to collaborate with somebody next to you, whoever that may happen to be, and try to bring all these things together. I would probably expand this to some biologists who are looking at pathways, because I think that's going to be a very promising area for research. And I would also hire a public relations person to get the message out about the importance of intelligence and some of the things that are so silly that are general beliefs in the population. So, Bill Gates, come on.
I would never spend $1 billion at my university because it wouldn't go through the bureaucratic, channel. They would require so many documents, signatures. It wouldn't be possible. But even if I get less, I think I would also set up maybe not an institute, but the network of researchers in order to ask the highly theoretical question what intelligence is for, meaning of course it's not for in a sense that someone made it for, but what is the nature of advantage that intelligent people have over less intelligent people, why exactly it gives so advantage in various areas of life. And as I was trying to convince you in Tuesday that it's not so obvious. For example, it was given as taken as a given that it's discovery of relations in your environment, and now you see that tests that do require discovery of relations are poorer tests of intelligence than are tests that the relations are given. So I think there is a lot of theoretical work, and I would devote this money for this.
I would probably first buy a robot so we can extend our stem cell facility and buy a very big lab so we can do high throughput iPSC generation. And then I would probably try to collect a large number of skin biopsies from people with a very high IQ and very low IQ, and would like to recruit a lot of very intelligent and motivated students to do all the work, to do a lot of testing on this. And then when we finally solve the mystery of IQ, we'll probably come back to all of you to discuss how we can implement this in our educational system and how we can benefit from that knowledge. So if you have a $1 billion somewhere lying around, then I would be happy to spend it.
So I would probably give the $1 billion to Doug to set up his institute, to be honest, because that sounds like a great idea. That would be the first thing I would do, a similar idea to that. But another thing I would do is use it to pay off teaching unions and other obstacles to scientific progress in order to give IQ tests and DNA tests to every child in the country and increase the sample size massively of all the research, and do something similar to what I talked about at the very start of my talk, which is the Scottish Mental Survey, where every single child had their IQ tested. Well, in my sort of fantasy dream, which is never going to happen, you would have every child tested on a proper battery of IQ tests and their DNA taken, and we could really make progress in genetics with really large sample sizes, and not neglecting the further down the line aspects as well. But yeah, I would set up my own countrywide study with that ceremony.
Okay, I think I was a little bit greedy at the beginning, taking all the money. So I decided to take 10% for me. And the 90, yeah, okay, that's reasonable. And the 90% I will make a foundation and put some people in it that would run it. I wouldn't bother with the stuff So they would, let's say, support research based mainly on the output of researchers. So not just on the proposal, but what they have published up to now. This would be a criterion, so this would be my idea.
And I agree with Professor Detman and Stuart. I think the institute idea is the best way to make this kind of offer valuable. But then at the practical level, I think I would spend money on making imaging techniques more cheaper and maybe portable and so on to study connectivity, and also I will invest money to increase the spatial resolution and accuracy of brain stimulation techniques. So my final dream is to have a very, very small, tiny device that you can just use it's a portable device. You can do it on patients or LT controls, and you measure how the brain responds to these 5 seconds of stimulation, and that can be a marker of something, marker of neurodegeneration or marker of your cognitive scores and so on. But to do that, we need to improve technology. I don't think I would need $1 billion. Maybe $1 million, it's enough. So
it's enough.
Then I will give you the rest.
Okay, thank you very much for all your answers to these questions. And finally,